Eventually, they landed on a small rise nearby and stayed there for a matter of minutes before Jim announced that he was going out to take a closer look. As Barbara stood at the window watching their business partner walk hesitantly towards these objects, she was suddenly struck by an unseen force, which lifted her off her feet and threw her backwards onto the floor. The 9 objects then began to ascend into the sky, leaving no trace of their passing. Luckily, Barbara had not been physically harmed during the encounter, but mentally, everyone present had been utterly shaken to their core.
You're good to go. It's hard to name a thing in this lifetime that'll last me a lifetime, but I'll only need one internet. 100% flat, powered by.
From that moment onwards, UFOs were frequently seen above the ranch, often interacting with the smaller orbs which had been there since the beginning. But as troubling as these developments were, they paled in comparison to another phenomenon which began to occur shortly after the arrival of the bizarre aerial objects. One evening, John's eldest son Joe noticed a strange dim light on the crest of the rise in front of the ranch house. A few months prior, a large cone-shaped craft had landed in that exact spot, and all the vegetation in the immediate vicinity had withered and failed to grow back. Jim and Joe got into a pickup truck and headed to the top of the small hill to investigate, but as they reached the summit, they realized that the light had disappeared. Exiting the vehicle, they saw that the strange dim glow was now emanating from the same thicket of trees in which Joe and his friend had seen the Sasquatch-like creature the previous winter, and with some trepidation, they began to descend the slope leading down towards the anomaly. Jim fully expected the light to recede as they approached, but on the contrary, it remained where it was. As they entered the tree line, they saw that the source of the light was a small, translucent, box-shaped object, which seemed to be emitting an odd buzzing sound. They would later state that it was similar to a beehive, and that the closer they got to it, the buzzing sound increased in both volume and pitch. Jim got the feeling that it was trying to ward them off, and not wanting to put his young companion in any unnecessary danger, walked Joe back to the truck and told him to return to the ranch house. Alone, he then headed back down the slope towards the woods and noticed that the glow had changed, seeming to have become more intense. Feeling no small degree of fear, he re-entered the tree line and was greeted by 2 strange-looking men wearing what looked like black flight suits. They were slender, around 5.5 feet tall, with very large eyes. Although Jim described them as human, he said that if you were to see them walking down a city street, you would have to look twice, as there was clearly something off about their appearance. In any case, they greeted him as if they had fully expected his company, and what followed was a somewhat pleasant exchange in which they apologized for all the disturbances taking place on the property, saying that a more equitable arrangement would be worked out. They warned Jim not to approach any of the small boxes like the one he had seen earlier, saying that he had been right to back away. They then nodded to a point 50 feet further into the clearing, where a disc-shaped object rested on the ground, with one of the small boxes sitting in front of it. At that moment, a Sasquatch-like entity emerged from the trees beyond and approached the small container, which began to buzz erratically. When it was close enough, the hulking creature reached out with its arm, and the moment its hand or paw or whatever it was made contact with the box, it dropped to the ground, dead. The 2 strange men then reiterated that they were quite lethal and should never be approached. They finished by saying that they would talk again, and Jim sensed that this was his cue to leave. As he walked back up the slope, he looked back towards the small woods and saw that the glow had now completely dissipated. He stood there in the darkness in a semi-trance, not quite believing what he had just witnessed. These strange-looking men were seen on a number of occasions by different people, often from a distance, and sometimes looking in through the windows of the house at night. Aside from these weird men and the Sasquatches, one other type of humanoid was witnessed. These were very tall, thin beings with insect-like characteristics who made only very rare appearances on the ranch. For some time after the surreal meeting in the woods, all paranormal activity on the property seemed to lessen or cease altogether, and for a few weeks at least, the family could sleep easy in the knowledge that their lives were returning to some semblance of normalcy. However, this relative peace would not last. Early one morning, Jim was lying on the sofa in the living room after breakfast, on the cusp of dropping back off to sleep, when a slight movement off to his right caught his attention. Standing there in the dawn light, on the other side of the patio doors, was a very tall and thin figure, wearing a strange-looking helmet over its head. Shocked at the sight of this entity, Jim went to get up, but found that he was completely paralyzed. The only thing he could move were his eyes, as he lay there transfixed by this motionless figure. It remained staring at him for only a couple of minutes, but it had felt like an eternity at the time. Eventually it turned and walked away, and it was only then that Jim found he was able to move freely again. After this sighting, all the previous activity on the ranch seemed to not only return, but intensify to a much greater degree than it ever had before. Some of the phenomena was downright terrifying, with certain members of the family being awoken in the night to find shadow figures standing at the ends of their beds, or glowing eyes staring in at them through the windows. Others described a localized hum that would enter the house itself and follow them from room to room. Even some visitors to the ranch would report being followed by whatever force resided there, experiencing similar sightings in their own homes for a short period afterwards. In most cases, however, the activity on the property itself would lessen whenever the family received guests. As a result, their claims would oftentimes be ridiculed by any newcomers, and so Jim, who was not too pleased about being called a liar, found ways to provoke the activity for the viewing pleasure of any disbelieving friends or relatives. He would go out into the pasture or woods and lay barbed wire in the ground or bury metal to make it look as though he was installing some kind of equipment. Afterwards, he would make his way back to the ranch house, only to see a swarm of small orbs descend on the area in which he'd made the apparent changes. These lights would then scout around as if searching for the reason behind this mini upheaval. It would be just such a provocation, however, that would result in one of the most spine-chilling episodes to ever occur on the ranch. In the autumn of 1976, John invited a former colleague over from Texas, who brought with him his wife and two daughters. They would be staying on the property over the weekend, celebrating Joe's birthday. At some point in the evening, they get into the subject of a strange activity. Yes. playing a game of Risk, all the lights in the house suddenly went out, and a disturbing, metallic sounding voice was heard to go through every single radio and TV speaker in the home. It simply said, shh. With that, the lights came back on, and John's colleague, although shocked, maintained that it was some kind of trick. He just so happened to be an electronics expert and asked if he could take apart the stereo and TV set to check them over, promising to put everything back together once he was finished. Despite his thoroughness, he found nothing, stating that the transmitter required to cause a signal of that intensity to go through every speaker was beyond the family's means to install. Needless to
What are people and yourself? What do people, family members think? Do they think you guys were brainwashed? Were people trying to bring you back to like, your old character? What was it like? Oh yeah, we heard the term. We heard the term brainwashed by our friends and family. And Yahweh ben Yahweh, he would use and play on that term. He would not run away from the term brainwash. He would simply say, "Yes, I'm brainwashing you. I'm washing your brains clean of white supremacy." And we'd all clap and go, "Yeah," because he believed that the world, that black folk, that our brothers and sisters, black Americans, that they were the ones who were actually brainwashed. He actually called he he had a phrase for black men. He called them dead Jacobs, and he called black women dead Eves, meaning they were mentally and spiritually dead. So he didn't run away from the term brainwash. He said, "Yeah, I'm brainwashing. I'm gonna wash your brains clean of white supremacy." And we were told basically to separate ourselves from our biological family. And he would give us scriptures showing you how Jesus disrespected and his own family. Matthew chapter 12 is a story where Jesus' mother and his brothers came to see him at the temple while he was preaching. And the guy goes inside. They stay outside. The guy goes inside and says, "Hey, your mama and your mother and your brothers out there, and they want to talk to you." And Jesus looks and goes, and he asked the question, "Who is my mother? And who are my brothers?" And then he stretches forth his hands to his disciples and said, "These are my brothers and mothers, and these are my family, those who do the will of God." And that's kind of what he gave us to say. Your biological family is not your real family. It's those who do the will of Yahweh. And we thought that, and we dismissed our biological families. Sheesh. So obviously, you said earlier you started to notice something was up, and you mentioned that you became was it an FBI informant? Yes. At what stage? What happened? What specifically happened for you to say, "Okay, you know what? I'm against the FBI," or did the FBI come to you at a time when you were already willing to talk? No, I went to them. I had gotten out, and as with most people who join cults and then leave cults, we basically want to get on with our lives, put the nightmare behind us, and just move on. And that's what I was trying to do. Just move on. I didn't want no smoke. I didn't want no problems with them because I knew they were a murderous group. I didn't. I knew they had beheaded and killed people. I didn't want to die, and I'm right there in Miami where they're at, and I knew they had large numbers. I did not want no problems with these people, but they would see me in the streets, at the mall, out and about, and the fact that they were highly racist. They called white people devils and white women she devils and that kind of thing. But they would see me out after I left the cult, and at one point, I was dating a lot of women. Let me just say that. I was dating ladies. He was a womanizer. Yes, all facts. See, I was an exotic dancer. I was a stripper. After I left, yes. So I had a lot of women, and I was dating, but my number one woman was a white chick. I had a white chick. That was my girlfriend. which goes against everything the Yahwehs were about. And they would see me out with her sometime at the mall. They saw me at a concert. They saw me. He got a she devil on his arms, and all that stuff would be reported back to Yahweh ben Yahweh. But the things that made me say FBI informant, none of that really bothered me, even though I was getting threatening looks in the street. They were looking at me sideways like ice grill, mean mugs, and all that stuff. But there were some incidents that happened that were happening that I knew were connected to the Yahweh. One in particular was the Opalaka thing that you mentioned earlier, where the guy was telling the media he's not leaving until you get an eviction notice. And he said, F Yahweh, that situation where 2 people were killed. And there was another situation where a whole black neighborhood was firebombed and a little black baby was burned.
Wow.
Due to the Yahweh.
I think I remember that.
And it was the firebombing of the black neighborhood and the baby burning that made me say, enough is enough. Somebody has to take a stance. Somebody has to say something. And I told my other girlfriend, a black woman, what I was going to do the next day. And I got up, drove downtown Miami to the FBI headquarters and walked in. And I spilled my guts and said, hey, my name, I used to be in the Yahwehs, the firebombing, the murder of the 2 guys in Opalaka of the apartment complex. This is what I know. And they debriefed me, and I officially became an FBI informant. And, I would talk to them several times a week for the first couple of years. It went on for about 5 years. In my naivete, I thought that me walking in would make them go arrest Yahweh ben Yahweh in 2 months. I'm naive, 25, 26 years old. I'm stupid. But it would drag on and drag out for 5 years. And it wasn't until I went to the FBI in 86, it wasn't until 1991 that the FBI set up a sting and early morning raid, like 4 a.m. or something, 5 a.m. They had a sting and they arrested about 16 of them around the nation. Yahweh ben Yahweh at the time was actually in New Orleans on a speaking tour. And they got him out of the Monteleone Hotel in New Orleans. They called his room up, said, come out with your hands up. And I watched it all unfold on the news. I was happy. I felt like my work had paid off. Mine and many others came forward. Even some of Yahweh ben Yahweh's family members became FBI informants. Even his biological family and his stepchildren informed on him. That's how bad he was. There's people like to say, yeah, you're a snitch, you're a rat. I said, okay, I'll take that. What do you say to Yahweh ben Yahweh's 3 stepchildren? What do you say to his niece and nephew? What do you say to his biological sister who testified against him? What do you say about them? You got to be a bad person when your blood takes the witness stand against you. And indeed, he was bad.
Businesses located close to this Yahweh economy and say they're not threatened by the Yahwehs. And they don't scare you. You're not afraid they're going to beat you up or anything. They didn't come here to talk to us, no. The Garcia family lives directly behind the motel. They say the Yahweh's presence in this neighborhood has made it a safer place to live. When they live in here, no more drugs, more prostitution. Safe. If they are dangerous for no, but for me and my family, no. Good neighbors.
You said it took years for the FBI did anything, and you said prior to you going to them, you had a white girl, someone that's bumped into you in certain public places. If they were so, treacherous, why didn't they make a move on you? How did they leave you to live as what they call a hypocrite for so long?
Right. Part of it was the connection between my wife was still there. When I left, my wife stayed. So she was there, and although she was fully against me, but still she was my wife. And I think Yahweh Ben Yahweh still had reservations that even though he had her, you never know what makes a person go the other way, or maybe if they killed me, that would be too much for my wife to bear, and maybe she might crack and she might leave and then go to the FBI. So they didn't, but they certainly gave me messages that came back to me that if they caught me, if I just happened to wander off down the wrong alley, that they definitely would take care of me. I mean, and the other thing that kept me alive, I would say, is that I became pretty public in the media.
I see.
Even though the FBI did not like the fact that I was speaking, I talked to the Miami Herald. The Miami Herald, which is the big newspaper in Miami, they did a whole on Sunday. That's when the paper comes out. They dedicated the whole living section of that paper to me. And by then I had married the white woman I was telling you about. I had married her. So they had a whole layout, pictures of me and her, me holding the Bible. I became kind of untouchable.
I see.
In other words, if you kill me, it's going to look pretty evident that
what you're saying is true.
Yeah. I was in the black newspapers. Now, mind you, I was talking about being a stripper. I was also a dancer. I was a trained dancer back in those days. I did ballet and jazz and modern. I did all. And I had been in the newspapers for dancing and pictures of me. So I was out there. And then in 1988, a New York radio station, CBS, Nationals TV came calling, and they did a whole thing on Yahweh Ben Yahweh, and they did a segment on me. So Yahweh Ben Yahweh was talking, and then they flipped over to me. So I was out there pretty heavy. And part of my strategy, because I knew they had killed people who had left the cult too. So part of my strategy was using the media as kind of a protection. If you're that foolish that you want to kill a man who's been on national TV, local newspaper, white newspaper, local black newspaper, all over the place, then go for it. I made it hard for them. And I think Yahweh Yahweh was smart enough to say, let's keep our hands off him. And his wife is still down there. And at certain points, my two children were down there. We were tug of war. We had tug of war with them. They were with her. I would get them. I let them go back there. She'd take them to the temple. It was a mess with that, but my kids were the other part of the equation. So Yahweh Ben Yahweh felt like I was probably untouchable. He had the media working for him. The wife was there, and the kids were there sometime.
How did that feel, knowing that your kids? I was going to say, originally I was going to ask you, how did you feel that your wife was there? But that you can manage because she's a grown woman who made a decision. Plus, at the time, you probably would have suspected that he's sleeping with her, even though you didn't have no sex. Your children, how did you feel about that?
Well, when I left, my son was 2 and my daughter was 5. And to this day, I always felt like if a man and woman can't be together and you have children that young, I believe the children should be with the mother.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Yes.
I believe that the maternal instincts of a mother, children, and my son was still breastfeeding. As much as I wanted to take them when I left, I didn't really know where I was going. I didn't have a penny in my pocket.
Yeah.
I didn't know where my biological family lived because we had stopped talking 4 years ago. I was just leaving. I didn't even know where I was going to sleep that night. So there was no way I was taking a 2 and a 5-year-old away from their mother, and I didn't know where I was going. So I knew that the kids would be fine. They would be clothed, fed, sheltered. My thing was I'd have to figure out a way, once I got myself together, how I could take the kids from her. And so that was a hard thing, leaving them. But I left